Boa tarde a todos, as pessoas que estão a assistir pelo Facebook, bem-vindos a esta conversa. É um prazer estar a moderar em nome da Rede Cultura hoje, esta conversa sobre fotografia e território com os nossos ilustres convidados. Good evening everyone, it's a pleasure to be hosting this meeting tonight on behalf of Rede Cultura 2027. I'll start by introducing our guests, a lot of different backgrounds, but also a lot of connections to fotografia. Olá, Álvaro.
Olá, João. Olá a todos.
Já estou
Olá,
aqui,
Paulo.
já estou aqui a fazer as apresentações. E vou fazer em inglês, apesar de os dois termos combinado.
Ok.
Falar em português. Our guest, Liz Wells, is... hello, Liz. Our guest, Liz Wells, comes from the United Kingdom. I heard already that is a great day today in UK, or at least where she lives. She's one of the well-known scholars worldwide in photography. She has an extensive work in writing, teaching, and curating photography and landscape. I will not nominate every space or every book or every exhibition because it's such a wide curriculum and it's so easy accessible that I don't think we need to do that, and I will do the same to Fritz. I'll just do a brief introduction. Fritz is also a teacher and curator at Rotterdam, Netherlands Photo Museum in Rotterdam. He also has an extensive experience in curating photography and territory, and that's why we invited him to talk with us tonight or this evening. Álvaro Domingues is a Portuguese teacher, researcher, also curator and photographer, though his photography is connected to his main activities as scholar and teacher, but he understands the role of photography in the knowledge of territory from a different perspective, not as an artist perspective or connected with the art market or something. Finally, our final guest is Paulo Catrica. Paulo is also a teacher and researcher and curator and photographer. His studies were made, his postgraduate studies were made in UK, his master and his doctorate, and his postdoctorate was made in Lisbon, if I'm not wrong. So each one of you brings to the table several levels of experience that will enrich and enliven our conversation. We are here on behalf of Rede Cultura 2027, which is the executive management of Leiria's, the region of Leiria candidacy to Capital Europeia da Cultura 2027. And we asked Leiria to talk or to consider photography as an important subject on behalf of the Cultura and the candidacy. So Lydia obviously is listening other cultural agents, and we tried that Lydia also listened to photography and photographers and everyone involved. Well, this will be a very brief introduction because I really want to know about our guest's experience. And I'm going to start with Liz. I think Liz has such an extensive knowledge about these matters that I will ask her mostly to speak about her experience as curator of photography and territory that she has. She done an extensive job on European landscape. She did also the Baltic landscapes, women photographers, and landscape. So there are a lot of different subjects. Lisa, if you could address some of them at least, why is today is so important to have different voices, different representations, not only in territory but politically and culturally. So I'm beginning with you, and
thanks very much, Joe. I'm not familiar with Leiria as a region, so I can't make direct connections from my experience to your experience, although I sincerely hope that if you succeed with the European City of Culture bid, it'll be a good reason for me to come and spend some time there in 2027. I think it's useful to take some basic starting points, the ones that I ask myself when I'm embarking on new projects. Why photography? What can photographers do? How are images implicated in the construction of our sense of place? How do archives contribute to enhancing historical perceptions for residents as well as for those based elsewhere, for schools and communities, as well as museums and tourism? And what might be needed to contextualize images or to complement the limitations of photographic aesthetics with its emphasis on visual perception? And I take it as axiomatic that landscape is a social product. Particular landscapes tell us something about cultural histories, attitudes, and socioeconomic circumstances. The past is marked in the present, visibly in terms of the shaping of land, and mythically through historical stories that contribute to our sense of where we are. Photography plays a crucial role in representing a land as a particular type of landscape, whether urban, rural, and so on, and also in terms of the interrelation of people and place. So it therefore contributes to constructing our sense of place, but also, since meanings and significances are fluid and change over time, in offering us a way of investigating land and place. So, Joe, you asked me to mention my experience as a researcher and curator, and I've selected a few examples to reference because each of them raise slightly different issues, ways of thinking about land and place. At the moment, I'm preoccupied with environmental investigations in my writing as series editor for publications on photography, place, environment, and through exhibitions. And I generally work with themed group exhibitions in order to foreground practice-led investigations, but also to be able to set up dialogues between different projects and different ways of working. My current exhibition, Seedscapes, Future-Proofing Nature, is an example. It addresses seeds and sustainability, woodlands and well-being, and brings together work by 5 artists. It's on tour at the moment, and what I'll do is I'll send a website link, because there's
Thank you.
there's actually a very, very good website at Impressions Gallery with a tour tool as well, so you can have a virtual visit.
Yes, that would be most
I won't try and do that at the same time as speaking, but I'll send it to you in a minute. I'm very lucky because, actually, like I think all of us here, I'm in the position of holding university posts. So I've never had to make my living as a curator. I've always been able to work as a curator and take time to research issues supported by whichever university I'm associated with at the time. You mentioned women and landscape, for example, and the first major exhibition I did, which was titled Viewfindings, way back in 1994, which went to 4 venues. It set out to draw attention to work by British-based women photographers in an era when landscape photography in the UK was dominated by white men.
Yes.
And now I was thinking about that and thinking, now, of course, in the context of the moment, certainly in the UK, one would be thinking very much in terms of Black Lives Matter and the sort of the new politics of diversity. But I've also guest created several exhibitions in the UK. I don't have time to go into all of them, but I've also guest curated exhibitions on land, place, and identity elsewhere in Europe. And each of them took a different starting point. For example, Facing East, contemporary landscape photography from Baltic areas, which you mentioned, was intended to introduce work not well known in the UK. And the rule was that there was at least one photographer from east of the 7 countries as surrounding the Baltic, the ones that we were working with, which were Nordic and also the former Soviet Baltic states. And what was interesting about that was, of course, that you couldn't simply do that. There was very little work with landscape going on in the Baltic states. There is an extensive amount of work investigating land and environment, and still is, in Finland, which is a really central place for the area of investigation that certainly that I'm involved with. So just the idea of one photographer or a couple of photographers representing different places doesn't actually work, because places have different histories. Yeah. Yes. It was a wonderful opportunity to research histories of photography in that region. Then I've done other sorts of exhibitions which have been more predetermined. That's to say, it didn't start with me so much as it started with projects that already existed that were being brought together. Sometimes that works really well, sometimes less so, because there are always many factors in play, including finance, size of exhibition, timescale, institutional circumstances, whether or not there can be a catalogue, which comes back to finance usually, and so on. For example, I was invited to work with 2 artists, Sophia Silvia and Crystal Labar, who had pursued residencies in northwest Croatia that were being brought together at the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Rijeka. It was a fantastic space. And in negotiation with the 2 artists, I conceptualized the exhibition in terms of conversations on nature. That the project had been founded on residencies became very important, not only for the content, but because the artists had been talking with forest rangers, botanists, and zoologists. And the museum was able to build on this through a 1-day interdisciplinary symposium, so that there was an art science discussion going on that the exhibition was able to provoke. Unfortunately, there was no catalogue, and I never had any direct feedback from audiences because I then came home. But I believe the exhibition was considered a success. But it was very much building on something that the artists had conceptualized in the first place. Another example, more recent, in 2018, was Layers of Visibility in Cyprus, for which there is a publication. And that was generated very differently. It was also based on artist residencies, but I had set up the residency scheme in conjunction with Nicosia Municipal Arts Centre. So the scheme had been moulded by myself and the director at NEMAC, the Arts Centre, and the exhibition idea sort of developed as the various artists made proposals, pursued their residencies, and in no case was 1 month long enough. So almost always they went back a year later, by which time they had follow-up questions. They'd been able to think in much more depth about their projects. Projects had matured. One of the questions you asked, Jo, was, what would you warn against? Well, that was quite interesting to think about, because I think my most difficult experience as a curator was probably an exhibition titled Sense of Place.
The European survey?
Exactly, yes. Yeah. It was hosted at the Centre des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, which is called Beaux-Arts, in 2012 as part of a Belgian summer festival of photography. And it was based on the premise of showing landscape photography from all 27 European member states. It was before Croatia joined, and it was well before the UK sadly left. But it was supposed to take place at the House of Europe in Brussels, the European headquarters, and also at Beaux-Arts, although in the end, the EU decided not to house it. It was right at the time when the Greek financial crisis was happening, and they decided they couldn't be seen to be spending money on an art initiative when Greece was having a crisis, which again tells us something about priorities, I guess. But there's a story behind it, which is that they'd had a complete change of staff in the photography section, including losing the person who had been heading up, or supposedly heading up, this project. And they employed a new department head who, as it happened, had known me slightly when he was a master's student. And he knew my work, and he contacted me, and he said, and essentially I came in 8 months before this show, which ended up involving 42 artists from 27 countries, was going to actually open. And the whole thing was done in a rush. There was no time to research it properly. There was no finance for studio visits. Some artists had been approached. Some countries like Malta, Romania, nobody had even looked at. So although, of course, we made a reasonable job and it worked. I don't know if any of you saw it. You might have done, Fritz, but it worked as a sort of survey show. I personally didn't feel that it was underpinned by the depth of research that I thought it would have been helpful to have. On the other hand, they did a great catalogue, which I checked today is available on Amazon. You can get hold of it. And it has a legacy. And that's the other thing that's very important when thinking about curating an exhibition. Exhibitions only last a little while. If you don't have a website and if you don't have a physical catalogue, then you don't have a lasting presence. So that's, I think, a factor to bear in mind. By the way, it was for Portugal at Beaux-Arts. We had Pedro Cabrita Reis, Sleep of Reason, and Augusta Alves da Silva's Iberia, the video installation. So neither were sort of pure photography in any sort of rectangular image sense. Both contributed, I think, quite effectively to what I always think of as a theatre of exhibition. If you were in a huge space with 42 artists, you've got to think about how that space is moderated from the point of view of the audience experience. And that was also very much in my mind. So I've run to the end of my time. So I just wanted to offer a few, actually the first thoughts that came to mind when I was thinking, what would I prioritize for a European City of Culture application? And I see it as offering an opportunity to seek time and funding to appraise and extend access to regional collections and archives, which might involve librarians and digital database enhancement, as well as photo historians and conservation specialists. But it's an opportunity to look at what you have and review it in the light of present circumstances. It's also an opportunity to focus on photo education, not only in terms of the archive and sort of systematically thinking about photography historically, but also more generally to foster more critically reflective ways of thinking about visual representation in relation to landscape place. And then thirdly, I'm really an advocate of supporting residencies, both undertaken probably by people locally, as well as involving external photographers, because I think photography is incredibly powerful as a tool for sustained investigation of the environment that we often fail to pay proper attention to.
Yes.
So I'll stop there. I've gone over time. I do apologise.
It was
compressed and introduce so many questions. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
We could be talking here a lot of time about your experience, but I do appreciate very much your synthesis on these matters, and we will be back to you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be passing the torch to Fritz now. Fritz has curated a tremendous exhibition in Madrid, at Eco Madrid a few years ago. He chose a number of photographic missions in Europe. He chose to show them. So Fritz, it is possible that you have also other experience that I personally don't know, but be free to address them too. But to me, this was my main point of entrance to your work, if I can say. So please, if you can talk to us a bit about that, and also other subjects, experiences, or artists. It's your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be present here in this webinar. So I'll do my best and explain a little bit about my curatorial experiences in Madrid, as you asked me. So I have to say my experience and my knowledge can't be compared to that of Liz, of course. So, but thank you, Liz, for speaking. And
I think nobody does.
I agree. I'm actually still using your Beaux-Arts book, so I think that was very welcome publication. Thank you for that. Anyway, my relationship with landscape photography goes way back to 1992. Just to explain a little bit of my background, I was then co-curator of the Photography Biennale in Rotterdam, and the edition of 92 was called Wasteland. It was my first exhibition when I dealt really with international trends in landscape photography. And then I continued with other artists and exhibitions, and actually in 1998, more than 20 years ago, I did a short research into photography and landscape commissions. Those were mainly Dutch, but already there were a few examples. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because it was Jorge Ribalta, a Spanish photographer, historian, writer, who many years later contacted me as he was on the board of the ICA Foundation, and he asked me if I wanted to do that exhibition again. And his interest lay in not so much in photography as an art form, you could say, but more in photography as an instrumental tool.
I know George's work.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So an instrumental tool, a medium that you could use, a medium with a social, of course, and political functions. And I guess we shared that kind of interest in landscape photography. And then we talked about commissions, because we knew there were a number of commissions also ongoing, and still ongoing, that deal with social, political, environmental aspects of the landscape. And those commissions are given by public institutions, mainly, to often a group of photographers to work in a certain area for a certain period of time with very specific goals. And the main example that probably we all know is, of course, the French Datar project. Yes. A large project in France that started in 1984 and lasted for almost 6 years, where international photographers were invited to depict, to visually represent the French landscapes and different aspects of that. And one of the starting points of that big project was the conclusion, after a research, that many French people had an image of the French landscape that was more related to the landscape 50 or 100 years ago than the actual situation in France.
All right.
And the Datar project was commissioned and was started up by a governmental organization that had to deal with the future of the French landscape, knowing that the large industries were going to disappear, knowing that the large infrastructural projects were had to be organized in the future, knowing, for instance, that a channel tunnel would come, etc., etc. So they were looking for ways to find support with the people, with the French people, for the changes that were to come. So political support, and photography, they thought, was one of the, I think it was a brilliant idea, one of the tools they could use to represent the contemporary French landscape, and then start a discussion. And that is actually what interests me so much. It's not so much landscape photography as an art form, well, also, but mainly the idea that photography can serve as a starting point for a dialogue between people, between inhabitants, but also a dialogue between disciplines, between photographers and urban planners, geographers, people who work in nature preservation, etc., etc. But also, as Liz also mentioned, on the level of photo education, be it school kids or photo students, etc., etc. These large commissions could be used in many different ways. And then, when invited by the ICO Foundation, the Fundación ICO, which is an architectural institute in Madrid and that participates each year in the Foto España summer, so then they have a photo exhibition, and that's why they invited me. They thought, well, let's make an inventory of commissions in Europe that deal with landscape, and which is a kind of inventory that could serve either as a source of inspiration, or as an example, or a source of ideas for others that want to start a big landscape photography commission project. So that's how it all happened. And then I knew, of course, already of some projects like the Datar, and started to look for other projects in different European countries, just as Liz had done, and looking also for a kind of variety in methods or in maybe photographers that were invited, etc. This was not so easy. For instance, the more historical projects, and I think it is an interesting lesson for the future. A number of projects were set up and quite successful in inviting photographers and producing work. But then, when it had to be used, when it had to serve in as was foreseen, very often either the budget stopped, or the people that organized it left the project, or the local or the regional politicians didn't know what to do with it. So some projects ended up in important collections like the French National Library. Other projects ended up just like that and completely disappeared. So it was not so easy to find the works or to find even the people who organized it. Some projects had ended many years ago, so it was really impossible. I had to contact the photographers. Or otherwise, I had to go to the collections that some of the projects finally ended in. Like in Denmark, when it came into a museum, the Dataris in the French National Library. Some of the organizations were still there, like the Centre Régional de la Photographie. They did a big project on the impact of the Channel Tunnel on the north of France. But then again, the British equivalent of it, made on the other side, I know there was a kind of Channel Tunnel photography project. Nobody could find the work. And the same went for a project in Düsseldorf. As somehow halfway people got into a fight with each other about the goals and the political function of the project, and nobody wanted to talk about it anymore. Well, these are just two examples of maybe lessons that can be learned from existing projects. And of course, I was a bit disappointed that, for instance, nobody wanted to talk again about certain projects, because the ones that go wrong are, of course, the most interesting. Anyway, I think I managed to...
The ones that Roger inside data?
No, not in data, no. Although, of course, the data is still an important project. I don't think it went wrong, but there were many discussions about what its meaning finally is. And of course, in the course of time, we start to think differently about those kind of projects. They get different meanings, and they are now part of the photographic history. As you may know, there has been a remake of the Datar exhibition a couple of years ago. Which is, I think it's very good. It also helps us to understand photography if important exhibitions are being remade, like the new topographics a couple of years ago. I think it's very important, and a kind of the photo history growing up, that we can look again at exhibitions and how they looked at the time and how the work was presented. But anyway, this is a side street. What I wanted to add to this is that the projects I chose, there are 8 projects from different countries. They all use different methods in the way photography is implemented. Like, photography can be a document, just documenting a situation or a territory. It can be used as a monitoring instrument. I'm thinking of re-photography, for instance, which is still ongoing in Switzerland. A method in photography that was developed by Mark Dingerk and Mark Klett. Photography can be used as an expression of a personal expression, a kind of document of experience, as it's called. So it can be used in many different ways. And I think this inventory, that's where it has its value, to look at the projects, to learn from that. I try to find all the organizers and ask them to write about their experience and how they look back upon the project. What went wrong, what was good, what was not so good, what would they have done differently. And I managed to find a number of them, not all of them, but a number of them. And last of all, I think that the book adds, as I already said, to the history writing of photography, because it's not so often that you learn about other things than just photographs, the makers, to maybe the location, the year, but I managed to include information on the commissioners, on the politicians behind them, on the people who took the initiative, but also on how they were financed. And also which kind of groups, educational institutions, local political institutions, or social groups were involved. And I think this is all a very important part, not only of photographic history, but also of a project en sich. So a project, a commissioning project, it is very important to have it embedded in lectures, in discussions, in educational programs, in exhibitions, in publication, you name it. And that local people, regional people that really live there and that work there are involved in the project from the beginning. This is a mistake that is often made. Photographers are sent to a territory or to an area, or photographers from outside. And if you want a project to be successful, I think it's very important to have local people included from the beginning, and maybe even help you decide about what actually will be photographed and how. So probably I'll stick to this. Probably my time is up by now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fritz, for your wonderful intervention. We'll get back to you in a minute. Paulo, you have such a long career in photography, and your projects always reflect a lot of the stuff that Liz and Fritz have been talking, but I will ask you not so much to talk about your projects, but mostly about your experience as curator also, because you were involved in a previous
yes.
Portuguese city that was Capital Europeia da Cultura, which
Yes.
was Guimarães.
Yes.
And I know you had some challenges and experiences there, so if you can address some of them, and of course you are also free to bring your projects to the fore if you need.
No.
And
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Yes, it's a great pleasure for me to be here, because somehow we in some other projects and in some other things that we did, we came across each other, all of us. So it's quite nice to be in such a very good company. Yes, as a photographer, I had two different experiences in Oporto 2001 with so I made what Fritz mentioned before, a kind of photographing all the major public interventions in the city center, which lasted for, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years. It was a huge and very complicated process. But I was a photographer integrated in a team of architects and urbanists. So I was doing photographs. We had to discuss them. It was very interesting for me as a photographer. And then Paulo Cunha Silva invited me to go to Rotterdam to do some photographs, because Rotterdam at the time was European capital of culture, and I had the pleasure to visit Fritz at that time, sort of 20 years back, I think, and buy your wonderful book, Suburban Options. And we had a nice coffee and a very nice chat. And then yes, and then that project unfortunately didn't go through, because the political atmosphere changed in January 2002. As Alvaro is here, and he remembers this quite well, the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats, whatever they are, they win the elections in Porto, in the council, and so a lot of things just sort of disappear, vanish in the air. So, but what I would like to talk to bring to this conversation or this discussion today is my experiences as a curator together with Pedro Bandeira in Guimarães 2012, and also with Álvaro, because Álvaro was a key figure in our project, because we decided to propose a photographic exhibition, a major in one of the major venues in Guimarães, a very nice venue, and we had also quite a substantial budget in order to do things properly, and we depart from this idea that came from a term that Álvaro coined, was that area of Portugal, Val do Ave, and all these industrial places that surrounded or somehow are in the outskirts of Guimarães, and somehow there is a huge contrast between Guimarães, which is an historical city. It's called the first. It was the first capital of Portugal, and so on. So it is a very important historical city. But all the areas surrounded by textile industries, major textile industries that were a bit out of time, and they were sort of between different industrial stages. And Álvaro coined this beautiful term, transgenic landscape, and transgenic landscape was our major. The concept for our exhibition. I will share just to let me see, share. Okay, share screen. I will just pass a few images of the catalog. I think Liz knows. Oh wow, I have lots of things in my. I have a huge no. How can I do this? It's like this. No? Can you see it? Or I had instructions, but I need some help. So I did share screen, but then I cannot put my, can you see my document? Can you allow? Is everyone there? Now, can you see it? No. They said it's
yes.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. So, our main goal, Pedro and I decided to invite European photographers that never worked before in Portugal. So we had this sort of this concept. How can we establish the names to invite it, and we thought about it somehow to invite European photographers that never worked in Portugal before, and to invite artists that work with photography from different with landscape photography from different approaches with different. Techniques and technical approaches, and so in order to challenge that all these differences, these different backgrounds, different approaches could set, not only could challenge aesthetical and critical that territory. So we made this exhibition with Engstrom and Guido Guidi, that are more sort of established photographers in the European scene, but then we decided also to invite Kathleen, which is a Swiss artist. And she works with analog photography, with she does a kind of a snapshot photography. She's let me find her. I will find it later. And also this Belgian photographer Philippe Dujardin that builds landscape photographs from existing pieces that he collects visual pieces, and then he decides to make these fictional landscapes and buildings. So it was very interesting. Our exhibition and had a very interesting also outcome, because somehow these four different visions of this territory, from different perspectives with different techniques. Even the exhibition was totally, Dujardin had larger prints, Guido has small analog prints, Katalin had huge analog prints, and then Engstrom have these Polaroids, and also these very, very small prints, this kind of a collage, a montage that he did during the whole process. So it was very interesting that our visitors were surprised by this idea that, for example, a lot of people would like very much Dujardin, these digital landscapes that Dujardin built. Somehow some of them were very provocative, like this one, and totally hate, for example, Guido approach. They said that it's nonsense, this is fantastic, that it isn't. So this sort of this contrast of opinions were very important, and somehow we thought at that time that the exhibition worked, because a lot of local people and also visitors that came from everywhere were challenged by these ideas. What can photography do, or what can landscape photography do at this particular time in 2012? So it was very interesting, the response of these different approaches. And also for us it was very important to somehow to show, we had this opportunity to show photographers that never worked in Portugal before, and never had shown any work in Portugal also. This is Katalin. She works with a handheld camera. She takes lots of snapshots from the window of the car. So each one of them, for us as curators, was quite challenging to follow their work and to have this opportunity of working with these photographers. But critically visiting these photographs and this project, we had also this idea about a kind of this idea between reality and kind of a fictional stage that, for example, Engstrom clearly demonstrates. Or so we had this diversity of approaches was very helpful for us at the time. If I had to do this now, I think almost 10 years passed since we start this project. I would bet on what Lies and also Fritz mentioned. It is very important to have a program that could reflect, could discuss these type of works or these type of commissions, or with local people. We would eventually, I would involve, or would prefer to involve more local people and local students, or even local different agents or associations or whatever. But I think also that it is one of the things that I find quite difficult in these situations, either in Porto or Guimarães. It's a kind of, the European culture seems that they arrive to a place and it looks like a sort of an overload of events crushed during a year. I think this is a nonsense. This is a total nonsense. There's too much things in a place that sometimes had only few things happening. So I think it would be better to extend instead of a year. The things should be extended and should be more local. They should involve more local people instead of bringing things from. I mean, our idea was to bring different visions in order to confront the people and in order to have a discussion. And this worked. Perfectly, I believe. Álvaro could also talk about this. I mean, people were discussing even during the opening. Was very interesting how people would like or dislike or at least would mention that, for example, the Dujardin Castle was an outrage vision of a landscape vision, or his kind of Balkanic textile factory was awful, you know, and for us this was very, very interesting. This and somehow our concept and our main goal for this project really worked. But somehow this project was also, it is very, you know, it lasted a month and a half or 2 months of exhibition, because all the exhibition places, was like in Porto and in Lisbon also in '94. You know, there is a massive number of events. There is a huge pile of money in situation. For us, it was good because we can pay the artists well. And we worked during a year and a half to prepare the show. It was we had very nice, working conditions, and we could give the artists also a very generous working conditions in terms of production, in terms of the number of journeys that they could go back. They went at least 2 or 3 times. I think apart from Guido, all the others came more than once. And Engstrom is going to publish his work. He's trying to publish his work, and Kathleen and Philippe also. So these photographs circulated among other books and other works that they did. So it was very interesting for us. But I would in my all this experience, particularly in Guimarães, I would concentrate on these ideas that Liz and Fritz mentioned before. It is very important to have a local connections. It is very important that all this noise could in fact bring something or confront people that live there, that work there, and that know, that habit that landscape. And of course, we use the name Mission in order to sort of affiliate this project with the kind of historical connections. So Mission Héliographique and Datar and all this, all of this photographic tradition in relation to landscape, but I think all the things, not only the landscape changes in a kind of the speed that things changes are increasing, but also the way that we use photography today is changing also massively. So I would bet that all these photographs could be very important if they have conferences, educational programs, discussion, to invite younger artists, not only established artists. I think it's useful. Although, if you win your bid, Leiria, please, if you invite younger artists, pay them decently, because there is a tradition now to make these lousy artistic residents with young students and not paying them. They need to be paid. They need to have conditions, and conditions are the most important thing in order to produce a decent work. Of course, you are very I believe it would be very nice if you invited us all, that we are here for a talk or anything that you consider, but any discussion that you consider, because I
must say that I'm here on behalf of Leiria, but I don't belong to Leiria. So I belong to Centro de Estudos, and we are also having the same ideas as you. So we want to pay the artists, we want to show the best and the emergent and the best work and etc. But this, we are all part of the cultural landscape and the industry. And so if we are part of the industry, we must do our part too. Okay.
And I think I just want to mention one last detail. Is the political aspect of these connections when you work with landscape, and somehow I think the most important thing on doing this kind of work is to have critical discussions on the matter, not to illustrate a kind of a political idea that for I mean, from a local government perspective of or whatever. I think it's the critical discussion that is important. Thank you.
I think we are going to ask our ministers and secretaries of state of culture to participate in this debate too. Ok, Álvaro, boa tarde.
Olá.
Obrigado por teres aceito conversar connosco.
É um prazer.
Eu só te coloquei no mail como participante em Guimarães e, portanto, a minha ignorância não te permitiu colocar no Porto, mas, pelos vistos, estiveste ainda mais ali conectado com o Porto.
Sim.
E por isso, peço-te que essas duas experiências possam ser aqui um pouco sintetizadas connosco.
Okay. Sorry, I don't speak English because I must think in Portuguese, and at the same time to translate in English, and this is very difficult for me. Sorry. Para te responder e entrar neste debate, eu em primeiro que tudo sou geógrafo e considero-me um geógrafo que fotografa.
Claro,
e não um fotógrafo que é geógrafo. E então, quando eu entrei para a faculdade para estudar geografia, diziam-me que a geografia que era a ciência das paisagens. Não propriamente aquela ideia de paisagem que vem da pintura e que é estudada pela estética da pintura, da fotografia, do cinema, enfim. Mas a paisagem como registro visual daquilo que muda. Uma espécie de pegada, não é? Que a sociedade vai deixando, vai modificando à medida que as coisas evoluem. Mas logo, no segundo ano ou no terceiro, já não sei, as coisas estavam a mudar muito na geografia e dizia-se que essa velha geografia, conhecida entre outros autores pelos livros do Orlando Ribeiro, que era uma geografia demasiado culturalista, demasiado literária, demasiado focada no passado, no tempo longo. E então entravam ventos de mudança acerca do que seria a geografia e passou a ser o estudo da organização do espaço. De repente passou de um conceito que nos era tão familiar para uma coisa extremamente vaga, extremamente técnica, que era a organização do espaço. Mas logo, esta geografia foi considerada de excessivamente tecnocrática, muito útil para o planeamento urbano e regional, mas muito tecnocrática, e logo apareceu um terceiro conceito central na geografia, que é o território. E então, eu, enquanto jovem estudante, faço esta trajetória em modo zapping, da paisagem para o território, passando pelo espaço geográfico e sempre usando a fotografia. porque isso era uma coisa que ainda tive a felicidade de fazer algumas viagens de estudo com o professor Orlando Ribeiro, e a fotografia era obrigatória. A fotografia era um instrumento de trabalho, tal como a cartografia. Todos conhecerão razoavelmente o trabalho fotográfico que o Duarte Belo tem divulgado, entre outros, o trabalho fotográfico do Orlando Ribeiro. Claro que havia ali muitas preocupações, chamemos-lhe estéticas, sem cair em grandes discussões, mas o foco da fotografia era documentar determinado modo de ver o território, que é o modo de ver do geógrafo. E então, eu devo dizer que até há muito pouco tempo nunca li nada sobre fotografia, nunca tive propriamente uma cultura fotográfica dos livros, da frequência de exposições, das discussões. Lembro-me de um primeiro encontro que tive com o Paulo, quando a Teresa Cis organizou uma exposição no recém-criado Centro Português de Fotografia. O Paulo estava a chegar de Londres, ou não sei se ainda estavas em Londres.
Sim, estava a chegar.
E o título era Periferia, e eu tive uma conversa com ele a dizer que tinha que ser no plural, tinha que ser periferias, exatamente por causa das dificuldades que nós tínhamos em perceber a metamorfose da urbanização. Cidade, de repente, tornou-se uma palavra sem sentido, porque tem muitos sentidos, mas, sobretudo, uma palavra completamente desadequada para nós percebermos o que é a urbanização. O que é hoje, mas não é só hoje, o que é que tem vindo a ser há muito tempo. E então o registro fotográfico é excelente para dar a ver de uma forma crítica, para criar uma inquietude, para criar um questionamento sobre o que é isto do território, porque a paisagem não é mais do que a visualidade do território, e sendo o território, como já dizia Monsieur Lefebvre, uma construção social, é através do território em parte que nós percebemos a sociedade, e portanto estas duas palavras, sociedade e território, não se podem entender separadas, mesmo que haja áreas disciplinares que se chamem sociologia e outras que se chamem outra coisa qualquer. O território é parte constituinte da condição humana, e a fisionomia do território é um espelho fidelíssimo da forma como a sociedade se organiza ou se desorganiza. Reflete as desigualdades, reflete as relações de poder, reflete a pobreza ou a riqueza. E eu creio que as capitais da cultura, porque são momentos excepcionais e criam uma apetência maior por parte de pessoas, de públicos que habitualmente andam arredados destas coisas, devia aproveitar essa visibilidade, essa excepcionalidade, para trabalhar muito com as escolas. Há bocado o Paulo sublinhava, e a Liz também, a envolvência dos chamados locais, das pessoas que vivem em determinados territórios, em determinados contextos. E isso é muito importante, porque parece um paradoxo do tempo de hoje, que vivemos numa cultura saturada de imagens, e ao mesmo tempo há uma profunda iliteracia da imagem. Eu gostava de vos contar uma frase que me ficou na cabeça, isto nunca mais me esquece, de um projeto onde eu participei com colegas meus do Centro de Estudos da Faculdade de Arquitetura, com o Nuno Travasso também, mas muito mais gente, em Vila Nova de Famalicão, e fazia parte o projeto chama-se Território Casa Comum, e está publicado. Tratava muito de entender paisagem e de perceber o que é que os outros, nomeadamente as pessoas que viviam lá, pensavam sobre o que era este nexo entre a sociedade e o território. E então tínhamos uma série de intervenções nas escolas do ensino secundário. E uma vez estou eu numa escola, à espera da hora para, enfim, nos juntarmos e debatermos esta questão da paisagem, E um aluno dos seus 14, 15 anos, não sei, veio ter comigo, apontou para o cartaz e disse-me se era eu que vinha à escola falar de paisagem. E eu disse que sim, que era eu. E ele respondeu-me quase em modo automático: pois, mas nós aqui não temos paisagem. Podem imaginar o que é uma afirmação destas para um geógrafo. Portanto, eu contei até 10, engoli em seco e perguntei então, nós estávamos até da porta da escola, tínhamos uma visão magnífica sobre o vale. Então, o que era paisagem para ele? E ele começou-me a desfiar uma série de estereótipos muito diversificados, que iam desde o skyline de Nova Iorque até às fantasias do Dubai, mas também incluíam uma montanha com neve e ele sublinhava um rebanho na frente, ou uma praia tropical e uma palmeira, ou seja, o território do dia-a-dia que ele conhecia, que ele percorria, ele não tinha ferramentas de leitura, não tinha forma de o nomear. Tudo era banal, e essa banalidade do cotidiano não fazia paisagem, porque ele achava que paisagem era uma coisa excepcional. E depois foi dizendo, há bocado o Paulo falou no Centro Histórico de Guimarães, que o Centro Histórico de Guimarães também era paisagem. Portanto, paisagem tratava de coisas excepcionais. E aquilo que nós fazíamos nas escolas era exatamente, não era bem o oposto, mas era completamente o contrário. Paisagem é um dispositivo que nos permite aceder ao conhecimento do que somos, do que são os outros, das coisas que partilhamos, de como é que um tema que está hoje muito, muito crítico, que são, em inglês, que são os commons, as coisas comuns, aquilo que partilhamos, mas também como é que entendemos as diferenças. E então, depois, já em ambiente de sala de aula, de workshop, tentando que os alunos conseguissem representar mapas mentais, portanto, umas paisagens pensadas e traduzidas em papel num grafismo simples, verificou-se que o problema inicial ali era que as coisas mínimas para eles não existiam porque não tinham nomes. Estas coisas, isto das palavras e das coisas, não é? E que palavras é que nós usamos para falar das coisas? E o que é que certas palavras arrastam consigo quando nomeiam as coisas de uma determinada maneira? E então, as palavras e as imagens aqui funcionam lindamente. Uma das coisas que eu gosto muito de fazer com gente nova é uma espécie de fotografias faladas, que é como quem põe a fotografia num scanning e começa a identificar cada uma das suas partes e tentar perceber o que é aquilo, o que é que as torna legíveis, que relações implícitas é que ali estão. E, portanto, para mim, paisagem é um dispositivo eminentemente político, uma vez que tem essa capacidade de pôr em confronto, tem essa capacidade de distribuir e de partilhar conhecimento, de construir alguns consensos, mas, sobretudo, de organizar a discussão. Porque a maior parte das questões sobre as quais pensamos e que experienciamos não se traduzem em consensos. E, portanto, a política é mais a gestão dos conflitos do que a construção dos consensos. E então, quando se expõe uma fotografia de paisagem, imediatamente o diálogo e às vezes a confrontação aparece. E é muito interessante perceber, como diria o Bruno Latour, de que é que se fala quando se fala de paisagem. Quem é que fala e quem está calado? Quem concorda e quem discorda? Que argumentos é que são trazidos para cima da mesa e como é que se defende uma determinada ideia? É muito comum nós ouvirmos que a paisagem está caótica ou está estragada, não é? Esse tipo de afirmações que nos sai boca fora, e isso é um material precioso que na geografia nós usamos há muito tempo. Usar o registro da paisagem não apenas como documento, mas sobretudo como matéria em discussão. Não é para discutir factos, é para discutir assuntos, é para discutir a forma como se constrói, como é que se constroem os regimes de visibilidade, porque eles são muitos, daquilo que se nos apresenta na frente. E porque estamos num tempo em que, diria o Camões, não é? Estamos num tempo de mudança. Ele dizia que o mundo que era feito de mudança, pois é verdade, não é? E ele continua a mudar, e de que maneira? Continua a mudar de forma aceleradíssima. Essa mudança já não é inteligível apenas conhecendo os lugares e aquilo que se passa ao nível local. Hoje praticamente tudo é global, ou tudo de alguma forma é influenciado por dinâmicas globais, sobretudo as do mercado capitalista global, e portanto, para além da velocidade a que acontecem as coisas, há também a complexidade e a dificuldade de as perceber. E então isso produz um tipo de cidadão muito estranho. Porque a cidadania só se pode construir tendo um mínimo de conhecimento sobre o que é que nós somos e como é que nos organizamos e porque é que as coisas são de determinada maneira e que possibilidade é que nós temos de as mudar e por aí fora. E esta mudança acelerada e esta complexidade vai criando sucessivas capas de invisibilidade ou de incompreensão, onde a fotografia pode atuar de forma muito eficaz para começar a discutir. Não só a chamada fotografia de intervenção, sobre temas que hoje são muito procurados, ligados com o ambiente, com a conservação da natureza, com esse tipo de desígnios políticos, mas eu diria tantos outros, não é? Tantos outros que às vezes estão escondidos por baixo de certas ideologias ambientalistas muito light e que ignoram que os conflitos ambientais são conflitos sociais. E, portanto, com um meio tão versátil, un art média, como dizia o Pierre Bourdieu no seu célebre livro sobre fotografia, não é? Uma arte que também é um meio, uma arte que também é comunicação. A fotografia presta-se lindamente para produzir essas discussões, para o confronto, para sair do mundo demasiado estrito da fotografia e abri-lo à discussão social.
Posso-te fazer uma pergunta que tem a ver com também nesta tua experiência como alguém que já esteve por trás das exposições, ou seja, que ajudou alguém a montar, que teve uma determinada ideia, um determinado conceito. Se tu tens alguma experiência, enfim, mais específica que queiras partilhar, em que seguiste uma determinada linha ou um determinado método, obviamente tudo isto que estás a dizer aqui já digamos, aponta um pouco para a tua forma de pensar e para a tua metodologia. Mas se tens alguma possibilidade ou queres partilhar alguma experiência específica. Eu sei que montaste exposição em Guimarães, não sei se montaste alguma no Porto.
Sabes que eu, como responsável por curador de exposições, não está aí a minha experiência. Eu, finalmente, este ano, vou ter uma exposição co-produzida pelo Museu da Paisagem e pelo ciclo da Bienal de Fotografia do Porto, sobre as paisagens transgénicas.
Como fotógrafo?
Exatamente. Como?
Como fotógrafo?
Como fotógrafo. Vou ser fotógrafo este ano.
Ok. Ok.
Porque das outras vezes, o que eu gosto de fazer é falar com eles. Falar
Ok.
com os fotógrafos,
Pronto,
ou
já-
falar,
Ok.
sair, não é? Nada como sair.
Ok.
Quando andava a fazer a Rua da Estrada, por exemplo, era muito solicitado para acompanhar grupos os mais diversos. E tive experiências, muitas com populações escolares, mas muitas delas também com pessoas que se reúnem em determinadas instituições e que achavam aquele desafio uma coisa estranha. E ao mesmo tempo não entendiam porque é que se pode tirar tanta informação disso. E então eu gosto de estar no back-office, falando, produzindo textos, porque para mim a fotografia, ela nunca, para mim nunca anda sozinha, não pode andar sozinha. Então tenho esta doença profissional
É isso mesmo.
de
Aliás,
geógrafo.
foi por causa disso que eu te convidei.
Tenho essa doença profissional de tentar estabelecer pontes e perceber podem dizer que é uma espécie de utilitarismo social, não é? Mas eu acho que a arte também é isso, não é? Também tem também tem esse poder de fazer sociedade.
Ok. Está bem. Obrigado, Álvaro. Vou passar agora um pouco a palavra ao debate. Se alguém quiser fazer algumas questões, ou inclusivamente, se vocês quiserem, eu vou agora adressar os convidados em inglês também. Se vocês quiserem fazer algumas perguntas uns aos outros, ou estaremos abertos ao debate, enfim, das pessoas que possam estar a assistir no Facebook. We will be opening the small amount of time for us to talk, either between each other. I don't know if any one of you wants to make any questions to any of the other guests, but our audience, or the people that is assisting this stream through Facebook, can also make questions, and I'll translate them if we need them. Otherwise, I'll just, synthesize a bit the ideas of Álvaro. Álvaro comes from a background of geography, and mostly he addressed the themes that we were already addressing before, but adding some wrinkles, if we mean, and most of them, of course, come from the possibility that photography lives between an ambiguous place between the art and the document, and the intentions of the photographer, and the art market, and the needs of the politicians, and whatever it is. So it's kind of sometimes a arduous job to make something of all of these, and I guess that Liz and Fritz had already some awful experience on those matters. So, but I took note because sometimes, you talked a bit about some difficulties and on those experiences, and it's the right time to try to avoid some mistakes. It's the right time to do something different. So I'll pass the word if you want to talk between each other or ask something.
Can I
Yes,
just
yes, please. Yes, please.
pick up on something, which was Paolo's point about everything happening in a great big rush and disappearing. And it was also picked up through Fritz's reference to the cross-channel project, because they dissolved the organisation. And actually, when I was at the Bibliothèque Nationale a couple of years ago for that restaging exhibition, somebody asked me about it as well. We know where the director of the project is. At least I know where she is. She's director of the Impressions Gallery now. But quite where the materials are, I don't know. I know she would know. But from those examples, it seems to me that planning legacy, Paolo's point, is crucial, and it's crucial from the start. It's not that you say, what are we going to make happen during that year? It's what are we going to make happen during that year that will be of benefit to the region for the foreseeable future, and that will somehow inform the way we think about visual dimensions of experience.
Yes.
It literally sort of written into the document, into the aims and intentions from the start.
Yes. Thank you. That is quite important. Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Fritz, we want to contribute something.
Yes, well, no, I can only agree. And that's, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's very important that we talk about photographs when we look at them and discuss and have a dialogue, because otherwise we get lost in those ideas of which are all true. I mean, we all know that all postmodern, discourse on truth and evidence, etc., etc. Of course, yes, but I think photography is still, useful in a way. It still tells us something. It can still be a tool for research and knowledge. I strongly believe in that. But I think it's important to share with each other what we see and what we think and why. Because in the end, it's about, bringing people together and talk about the society where we want to live in and how we do that together.
Yes. Thank you, Fritz, for your contribution.
I would like to say something, João.
Yes.
Yes. Following Liz and Fritz comments or statements, better. Yes, I think also there is it is very important that all these events related with that use or promote the idea of seeing, of these visibility regimes that Álvaro also mentioned. That also it is very important that in a lot of these places, for example, in Leiria, there is a good photography archive and a good cinema archive and cinema institution, kind of a museum, the Museum of Moving Image. So it is very important also to that these kind of events, and because they bring a lot of money in terms of facilities, but they should also bring money in terms of stability, of having the possibility of employing people to work in the archives, employing people that have skills and knowledge in terms of these kind of historical patrimony that visual images, either photography or cinema, has, and this is crucial also because Portugal is very poor. It's very poor.
We had
with archives. Yes.
This series of talks are composed of 4 meetings, and one of those talks was already held, and the archive was the main issue. So this connection with the museums, the archives, will be of the utmost importance. So this will not be the only conversation that we will have.
Yes, I mean, yeah. Okay.
Yes, Paulo. Yes. Álvaro.
Que me dizes? Querias fazer alguma pergunta?
Não necessariamente. Queria, se quiseres acrescentar alguma coisa, perguntar alguma coisa.
Há uma questão que é posta pelo Gustavo nos comentários.
Sim. Queres
Ele
responder?
pede para desenvolver, sim, é acerca desta espécie de fertilização cruzada que pode haver entre o olhar de quem vem de fora e quem vem de um campo cultural e de referências culturais completamente distintas e é desafiado para fotografar.
Espera, Álvaro, eu já te dou a palavra e vais ser tu, mas eu vou também dizer aos outros, podem alguém querer dizer alguma coisa, mas depois falas tu a seguir, se não te importas.
Okay.
One of our assistants asks of the importance of the benefits or of having foreign and local observers or photographers. So Álvaro will be addressing this question, but any of you, if you want to add something, and Paulo, I think you mentioned it, Fritz also mentioned it, but at the moment Álvaro is going to address this question. But if any of you wants to address it after Álvaro, we can do it, okay? Thank you. Álvaro.
Ok. Sobretudo quando se trabalha com gente nova e se cria um ambiente completamente diferente daquilo que é o dia-a-dia da escola. E a escola está a ficar uma coisa muito cinzenta, muito repetitiva, muito pouco interessante, porque está muito fechada sobre si e sobre os programas. E este tipo de eventos tem a vantagem de criar uma ambiência completamente distinta e que permite uma predisposição para ver as coisas de outra maneira, para fazer coisas de outra maneira e para ter alguém que não é da nossa cultura, que nos visita e que é uma pessoa famosa, como eles dizem, não é? Ou que é uma pessoa que está cá por alguma razão, porque é muito respeitado naquele meio e eu vou ter a oportunidade de trabalhar com essa pessoa. E então eu já assisti a algumas coisas em que havia profissionais conhecidos e que faziam uma coisa que hoje se faz muito facilmente, que é toda a gente tem um dispositivo eletrónico que tira fotografias e depois organizam-se uns workshops em que a rapaziada vai lá para fora, tira as fotografias que entende e depois se lhe pede para escolher 3 ou 4, não mais que isso, e apresentá-las e discuti-las publicamente. É uma estratégia que funciona lindamente e que muitas vezes tem a vantagem depois de deixar esse vício. Isto de envolver as instituições é muito importante porque, mais do que as pessoas, as instituições podem manter a durabilidade dos projetos. E se as coisas correrem bem, um tempo extraordinário de capital da cultura pode produzir aquilo que se chama o efeito de demonstração. Ou seja, fazer coisas que nunca foram feitas e que parecem muito complicadas e não são nada complicadas. E depois perceber como é que, saindo desses tempos extraordinários para o tempo comum de todos os dias, nós podemos adquirir outras formas de aceder ao conhecimento, outras formas de nos conhecermos melhor uns aos outros.
Ok. Obrigado. Boa. Obrigado. Any one of you wants to address this question also?
Could you summarize what Alvera just said? Because otherwise I might repeat it.
Yes, Álvaro said that is important that in this context of the involving local people and coming people from the outside, we can involve he talked about a strategy to involve local people that involves asking people, not photographers, because everyone has a photography in his pocket today, but to go outside and take photographies and select a few of them to talk about them. You know, anyone. I go outside, I take a bunch of photographies, then a few are selected, and I will have to talk about them in public. So this is a kind of a different way of relating not only with the landscape and photography, but the distribution and production of knowledge, that it's quite different from the regular schools of today. So Álvaro also talked about of the grayness of schools, of learning, the process of learning nowadays. Alvaro, did I make any mistake?
No, quite right.
I was just reflecting in response to a question that when I moved to the village where I live 20 years ago, I did two things quite deliberately. One was every day for the first month I was here, I walked up a path that I had never walked up before. So I mapped the village for myself. But I also spent time hanging around on the beach, talking with, they were all retired by now, talking with retired local fishermen. And I learned a huge amount about the village that way through looking at pathways and thinking about, well, where did they lead? Why did people lead a path here, there, then? And also the fishing stories and what their grandfather and their great-grandfather and so on had done. As somebody coming from London to live in a small rural village, which has very much its own history, that was a fantastic source. Now, clearly, if we had mobile, we did have mobile phones, but we didn't have cameras on them. It would have been very interesting to have asked, particularly some of the fishermen, to make a photograph for me and then tell the story. The one thing they wouldn't have done, unless they were in the pub with a lot of beer, was told that story in public in quite that way. It was very much about looking after me as an incomer to a village and as a, an older woman who is not going to upset things in any way whatsoever, and as somebody who wanted to hear stories that they'd told everyone else thousands of times. But once you begin to record those stories visually or verbally, you begin to create a sort of tapestry of local implicit knowledge that becomes a tapestry, a sort of method of sharing it. And you can work with that notion photographically. But then the other thing I was thinking about is that when you arrive as an outsider, you pay attention to things that locals take utterly for granted, and you ask different questions. So I think these two perspectives complement each other. And the question is how to bring them together in some way so that there is a sort of blending of different, a complexity of different stories that tell you something about place.
Yes. Thank you, Liz. We have a question to Paulo Catrica. Paulo, can you address the question to you? The irony as a method, do you think it is still useful in landscape photography? You are muted.
Yeah.
Paulo.
I think Alvaro would be the best one to discuss about irony. I mean, I believe Liz and Fritz, I don't know if they know. Liz, eventually you know about Alvaro because I wrote something for Photographies about Alvaro's work and about irony. So yes, I think irony is a very powerful tool. Alvaro would progress from my words, please. But
these are
but I think yes, irony is a very sophisticated system of communication, and I believe Alvaro does that in a very sophisticated way as well. Is very interesting, particularly in a way that somehow we all mention this idea of photographs addressing things that usually are not discussed in a daily basis, and somehow what I think is very interesting also about my idea of still, like Fritz said, that I still believe that photographs are useful to see landscape or to see whatever, but landscape is I think landscape is very persuasive because it's always it's a historical relation as well. So, but I think irony and for example, in a way Alvaro uses it in his own photography work, can lead us to a very important moment in Portugal, to see things and to discuss seriously things that otherwise are not discussed. They are considered less in a sort of less important subjects. They are sort of it's a kind of like Alvaro said, it's a kind of a minor landscape. I think that we see every day, but we don't want to discuss it, because it's part of something that is not statically taken care. This is the general idea. This is not true. Of course, I'm not. This is the a kind of a common image that somehow I work in a sort of suburban place in Lisbon. It's not a suburban place, but it is not a city center. And when I put some of my photographs in Facebook about this, a lot of people think this is bad. This is a bad place. This is a fantastic place to live, with lots of people, real people, not tourists, real people. And of course, I like very much to be here, and I like to take these photographs. I don't take photographs as a kind of a political critical situations. I don't consider all these landscapes minor or less important. I take photographs with a big camera because they are very important for me. And I want people to see. I try to communicate with my photographs, and sometimes I use irony. But Alvaro is very much your own subject, I think.
Okay, thank you, Paul. There's another question here, and I will adapt the question because I think it's important. How does Instagram photography can be used in a way that addresses subject? I know this is quite a difficult question, but because we are all set in an idea that Instagram is all that flow of images that are always the same places, the same the same themes, the same subjects. But how do you have any idea how can we transform pictures from Instagram in a productive way in all the senses that we've been talking here? Because nowadays, yes.
I was going to say, isn't this about context and the purpose of the communication, and also about the limitation of photographs in themselves? Because this is slightly aside from Instagram, although Instagram is as good a means of communicating as any other for particular purposes. But photographs are limited in what they can do. I was thinking about your neighborhood, Paolo. Your photographs cannot help me to smell it or feel it or touch it or taste the air or think about the implications, know about the implications of what I see from the perspective of anyone other than my reading of a photograph. So I think the whole thing about purpose and context is absolutely crucial. Instagram might be the best way of communicating something if the aim is to express something speedily to a wide number of people and to generate a conversation. But it might not be the best way of engaging with a phenomenon if you want to pause, look at it, blow it up large in a museum setting, use moving image because you're actually looking at change over time or whatever. So it's not about Instagram per se, or about analog or digital photograph or still or moving image. It's about what it is that you want to say and how best to say it and who you want to say it to and what context they're going to receive it in. Sorry, I've got a long-winded response.
That's fine. Yes.
Yeah.
Eu queria dizer alguma coisa sobre isso, porque é verdade aquilo que o McLuhan disse, the medium is the message, no caso do Instagram, porque o Instagram tornou-se uma máquina de produzir genéricos superficiais que circulam, enfim, que podem ser lidos por uma diversidade de culturas enormes. Eu tive a sorte de participar num júri de doutoramento que aplica os métodos da chamada netnografia, da etnografia na internet e tudo aquilo que vai na internet. E o trabalho era sobre como é que o Instagram reproduzia determinados protótipos sobre um determinado destino turístico e quais eram os divisores comuns da fotografia do Instagram. De facto, eram mais do mesmo. Era chover no molhado, eram de uma redundância incrível, ao ponto de já haver um turismo instagramável, porque vai-se a um determinado local para tirar uma determinada fotografia num determinado ângulo para pôr no Instagram. Até na indústria dos cruzeiros, antes do Covid, já havia empresas que anunciavam o facto de ter um bom acesso à internet em qualquer local do alto mar para o Instagram funcionar. E, portanto, para o cruzeiro ser todo instagramável sem sair do barco sequer, porque vivia da sociabilidade própria daquilo que é uma coisa totalizante, como é um cruzeiro. Portanto, é o Instagram que deve ser interrogado como dispositivo de comunicação, porque ele depois formata o tipo de fotografia, os hashtags, tudo aquilo que faz parte desse meio de comunicação. Mas eu acho francamente pobre.
Posso dizer alguma coisa? Can I say something? Just because Liz and Fritz were out of Álvaro, because Álvaro was saying how Instagram reproduces archetypes, visual archetypes, and the discourse is more or less established by this idea of the archetype, but not by something, as you said before, Liz, is not discursive, is not the context. But I think also that there is this idea of using this possibility of taking pictures as a way to, in museums and in all of these places. Everyone takes pictures. I have friends that go to very different places and try to show me their photographs through mobile phones. And I say, no, we can have lunch and we can talk about it. You can describe it. It's just like Álvaro said before, you can describe a landscape in words. It's more beautiful. You can describe your experience. So I don't need photographs to, just like Lee said, I can describe the smell of the food in the restaurant here. It's not a picture. I cannot, these people that insist in putting what they eat in Instagram. I think it's good that they do it because they amuse themselves. But as a discourse, I think it doesn't work. I mean, it's another thing. It's like I don't know. It's a minor type of communication through photography. I think it's emotional. It's all okay. Sorry.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, damas e cavalheiros, it was a great pleasure to have you tonight, and I hope we can further discuss this subject not only in this limited mean, but also in our physical presence to look at each other and talk about these subjects that are so enthusiastic for us. Thank you, and obrigado a todos os que assistiram. Thank you. Good night. And,
good night. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Obrigado a todos.
And good luck.
Ciao.